almost all of the deep strategic thinking that I do for complex systems, every single patent that I've worked on, every single complex research system that I've assisted in, including the foundations of all aspects of Mentor that I've assisted in the architecture of the design of, I've used this approach. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Goju Tech Talk. Today, I wanted to talk about the art of thinking deeply. So let's dive in. When I first started in industry, I joined a startup and I was working with this very smart computer scientist, computer engineer, who is actually the person that introduced me to Dvorak. And after a year or two, he and I joined a startup and we became office mates. So every day we were working together, and given this is moving kind of like at startup speed, it would be more than just 5 days a week. Sometimes it would be 6-7 days a week, 60-hour weeks on, that's like the small end. And sometimes it would be more than that. It was actually to the point to where some of us would even sleep at the office. It's just startup life, right? Anyway, we were considered, I think, somewhat senior at this startup. And so we got to share an office together, which was great. We actually advocated for it, and they gave it to us because we were able to get a lot of things done. And what was interesting, I think, is my colleague, I'll kind of leave his name out of this since I don't have his permission to be telling this story, but we'll just call him Martin. So Martin and I are working together, and Martin is getting just an incredible amount of work done. A lot more, actually, than I'm getting done. And what's even more curious is it seems as though he's actually working less than me. And for all intents and purposes, he could absolutely be smarter than me. But we were kind of, I think, at parity when we started in industry. We'd been working together for 2 years or a year and a half or so prior to this startup. And one of the things that I noticed is almost every day in the office when we were there together, again, we'd have our own office, closed door, and we would just crank out code, headphones on, wired headphones back in that day. And one of the things I observed is he would sit in silence at his desk, and he would kind of do this. He'd kind of like do this, and sometimes he would close his eyes. Sometimes he would write things down on the board, but he would not be writing anything on the computer. He wouldn't be coding. He wouldn't be taking notes on the computer. He might have like a pad of paper or something like the Remarkable that I use and jot things down. But for the most part, it was sort of full quiet for him. And after he was doing this for some time, I got around to asking him because I was just curious about, he would do this for 30 minutes a day minimum, sometimes longer. Sometimes he would spend like a couple hours doing this. And keep in mind, his output, the things he was able to do were incredible. One of the systems that he built was so advanced that he and I couldn't figure out how to do it using template metaprogramming. So he used C macros, C preprocessor macros to do this. And basically what it did is it was this massive code synthesis system that basically wrote a whole bunch of code. I think this is back in the day of things like Microsoft Web Services. And so it was like building all these APIs for various web plugins, and it was doing it entirely through macros. He would write a small amount of code, and then hundreds, maybe thousands of lines of code would be generated. And so he was really just massively productive. But every day he would spend this time, again, 30 to maybe 90 minutes, sometimes whole afternoon, just sort of staring at a blank screen. Just seemed like thinking or something, meditating. Sometimes it almost felt like he might be sleeping, but I don't think he ever was. So I asked him about it, and Martin shared with me what he was doing. And he said that every day what he would try to do is he would turn off all the external noise in the world, his email, his code, communication with any people, including me. Always have his headphones on. It turns out he was just listening to sort of white noise to block out the office background noise. And as he started to think about things and do this sort of meditation, his mind would sort of assemble the pieces that are necessary to solve these very complex problems. And what he shared with me is that before he did this technique, he struggled to really get his head around very complex issues. But once he started to do this, I can't remember how he learned this. He was sort of a big martial arts person as well. And so maybe it's through sort of the meditations that they will often do, or like the mental discipline, this type of thing. But he shared with me that this was profoundly impacting his ability to solve highly complex problems. Now, keep in mind, Martin is the guy that shared with me, oh, Goju, you should check out Dvorak as a way to type. And he knew that I was like creating Notica. I'm probably a couple years into Notica at this point. And so he knew that I was like a very hardcore coder and had big aspirations, and I just wanted to do stuff. And he said, if you learned Dvorak, it might be better for your carpal tunnel, and it's more balanced, all these things. And so after he prompted me with the Dvorak, I eventually sat down and I spent the time necessary and I learned Dvorak, and I think he was right. I can still type QWERTY a little bit, but I don't know that I would go back. I just think, at least for me, Dvorak is significantly better for a number of reasons. And one of the reasons is the speed, but even if that's potentially debatable, I think that the comfort part and the balance between the two hands and the focus on home row, that's sort of just empirically, it's hard to argue against those benefits. So because this is someone that I deeply trust, right, I decide I'm going to start to do this. And so I start to do this deep thinking. Now, at first, it was kind of strange, I'll be honest, because it felt like, especially when I did it at work, it felt like I wasn't working. It felt like when I was at work, I was supposed to be doing something. I was supposed to be typing an email or typing code or reading something, not just kind of like staring off into space, which made it appear like maybe I'm daydreaming. I was kind of a little self-conscious about what other people thought. And keep in mind, at this point, I'm in my mid 20s or something. So I'm still a little green. And after I got over the hurdle of kind of caring what people think, what started to happen is I too started to be able to solve much more complicated problems than I could before. In particular, there was one time where I think it was maybe my first or second time to India. I was on this flight, and the flight to India from where I was at the time, I think I was in Denver. And I think the total travel time was something like 14, 16 hours, but I think the flight was maybe only 9 hours, something like that. And at this point in Nautica, I was starting to try to figure out how to build the intelligence for the NPCs, the non-player characters, the mobs, as they call them. And I wanted them to be sophisticated. I wanted to have all this power and to just do a variety of things. I wanted a spectrum. Like I wanted to have sort of the stupid blobs that just like charge at you and they're just mindless idiots. But I also wanted the very serious strategist where they would plot, they would think about things, they would rally their friends, they would run away, just like I wanted to be able to do a variety of solutions. And I had never built something. I had never built a framework to support such complexity prior to this. I had built complex systems, but I had not built a framework for complex systems. What I'm getting at is I hadn't done the meta version of it, sort of like while I had programmed a lot of things, I hadn't created a programming environment for other people, including myself, to create complex things. And I didn't really know exactly how to do this. So I decided that on my way to India, I would try to do this. And on the flight out there, I basically just had my headphones and I had maybe an MP3 player and a pad of paper. I think ebooks were not really, well, they certainly weren't where they are today. Today, I would use my Remarkable. And no, I'm not sponsored by Remarkable, but absolutely love this thing. So I spent the entire flight to India in my chair, sipping on Diet Coke, no Coke Zero back then, and trying to figure out how to do this, mostly just with my thoughts, no computer. And by the time I landed in New Delhi, I had the framework teased out. I had at least what I thought were the core pieces to make this work. I then spent the next several weeks while I wasn't working building the thing that I had dreamed up. And sure enough, for the most part, like let's say 97%, it worked. This was maybe the first time I got concrete evidence that using this technique that Martin had taught me actually works. As I move forward in my career, I use this all the time. I use this daily now. On top of that, almost all of the deep strategic thinking that I do for complex systems, every single patent that I've worked on, every single complex research system that I've assisted in, including the foundations of all aspects of Mentor that I've assisted in the architecture of the design of, I've used this approach. Now, I've also collaborated with other people, but I do believe that there's a time and a space where having this quiet time by yourself, turning off all distractions, and just thinking deeply can level you up in a way that may not be possible using any other technique. At least that's been my experience. I also want to differentiate here because I used to be a serious runner and I would go on these long runs, and I also walk the dog, and I take him on relatively long walks. I mean, sometimes it's just 2 or 3 miles, which may take us 30 minutes to an hour, depending on like how much he wants to stop. But sometimes we'll actually go much longer. We will actually go on 2 3 hour hikes covering like maybe 6 miles. And what I find is after a period of time, after he kind of finds his groove, I find my groove, it usually maybe takes 20 30 minutes, my mind will start to wander and I'm able to start to think deeply about really complicated things. In fact, that's sort of why we named the company Merly. Is there was a joke that all of my great thoughts have come from long walks that I've had with the dog. So I wanted to share this because I've noticed that there may be a difference in the things that I'm able to think when I'm on these walks, I'm on these runs, versus when I'm kind of sitting in isolation with just white noise. For me, I'd like to have the white noise like what's playing right now. Maybe for you that doesn't work. I encourage you to, if you decide to explore this, I encourage you to do whatever you think is best. Maybe try a few different things. I find sort of the rhythmic background, as long as it's super peaceful, is super helpful for me to kind of like unlock my mind, but still be active enough to where I'm not distracted by the music, but the music also isn't putting me to sleep. I think that these are sort of like some of the key things that you may have to navigate. But for me, at least, I find that there is a little bit of a difference between the deep thoughts that I have when I'm running or walking. And part of that is when I do this, I will have my notepad and I'll often have just a blank canvas. Maybe I'll have a couple words at the top describing what it is I'm going to think about. And then I will just kind of sit. And it's interesting because at first, and I've been doing this for 20 years now. At first, it's at first I'm kind of touching on maybe just superficial, very high level, kind of boring things that are just not that interesting. But then what happens is as I start to tug on these threads, as I start to pull on them, and I start to think more deeply, I start to get a lot more strategic degrees of separation of thought. Like I'll go down mentally some of these really fascinating rabbit holes. And I think because I'm sitting in silence and I have my notepad, I can jot down notes, and it allows me to sort of go further down the rabbit hole than I might be able to go if I were just on a hike or on a run or walk the dog, because I might lose my train of thought. Now, again, I'm not saying that you have to do it the way that I do it. By all means, use whatever mechanism I think is, you find is best for you. But I wanted to share this with everyone because I was working with some of the Merlians, and one of the questions that they had was, how do I come up with sort of these really strange and maybe creative strategic ideas on what to do next and how to figure things out? And I explained to them that I mostly just will do this deep sort of meditative thinking, where it's like I'm collecting my thoughts and then I'm trying to organize them and trying to shake loose stuff that I can't quite see if I didn't sit in silence and allow myself to get beyond sort of just the superficial of, oh, we have to solve problem A. And so I just wanted to take a moment today to share this with all of you. The feedback that I got from some of the Merlians was this was wildly helpful for them. And it was actually a little jarring for them when they first started to do this, because they maybe experienced a little bit of what I was experiencing when you first started to do it. It may feel a little strange, like it almost appears like you're not doing anything, but you are. It kind of sort of like water turning into ice. If you put it in the freezer, it looks like nothing's happening, but something is really happening. I think the same is happening here, is that as long as you don't let your mind wander off into, weekend plans or things that you want to do outside of the work or the problem that you're trying to solve, and you are disciplined in your thinking and you can stay focused on whatever it is the problem is at hand, then I think, at least for me, this technique has proven to be just invaluable. I actually can't even imagine doing deep strategic thinking on things. And there were a few things that happened this week at Merly where I was even telling the team, they were asking me to give guidance on what should we do, Goju. And I said, I don't know. I need time to think about this. I need to have some of my quiet, sort of meditative thought where I can go through the degrees of separation and write things down before I can have any kind of reasonable plan that isn't just sort of a superficial knee-jerk reaction to something. So that's basically it. I just wanted to share that little tidbit with all of you. And my hope is that someone somewhere is watching this and it's helping them in some capacity. Okay. Have a great weekend. Thanks, everybody.